Hi folks, and welcome back to Meaningful Money. Cam here in Lost Withiel, quite a long way from where I normally am, up seeing clients here today, so hence best bib and tucker and all that. Too hot for a tie though. Carrying on our series on equity release, I need to talk now about some of the sort of legal and planning considerations, the things you need to think about if you are considering equity release of any kind. These are the things which, when you sort of seek advice on this issue, you need to have in mind. A good advisor would bring in some other ones as well, and I'll come to those perhaps next time. But as far as today is concerned, 4 key things you need to think about when you're considering equity release. As ever, before we get into the detail, my good friends down here, see them down here, VII Investment Management, who continue to sponsor this show. I'm very grateful to them for doing so. They help me to keep going and keep getting better, hopefully. So, legal and planning considerations for equity release. The first one you need to think about really is the impact of equity release on state benefits. What you're doing, obviously, if you big wasp. What you're doing if you're releasing money from your property is that you're changing the form of that money. Instead of it being bricks and mortar, it's now going to be cash in your bank account, or extra income that you didn't have before if you're withdrawing the equity release on a sort of bit by bit basis, and that might impact on some state benefits, means tested ones, obviously, of course. Certain benefits that we talked about before, particularly under the long-term care series, certain benefits are not means tested, so attendance allowance, disability living allowance, things like that. But there are some benefits which are means tested, and the big one is pensions credit. Obviously, people considering equity release are in their 60s, 70s and 80s, so pensions credit may be a factor for you. You need to be really careful when you're taking out equity release that it doesn't impact adversely on that, because if it does, it could be that you're actually getting precious little benefit. All your equity release is doing is replacing what you could get for free from the state. Also, it's not really sort of a state benefit as such, but sometimes you may be able to get grants for home improvements, you know, loft insulation, cavity wall insulation, things like that. If you have money in the bank as a result of equity release, that can preclude you from getting the benefit of those grants. So just be careful. Look at how your proposed equity release interplays with any state benefits that you could or are receiving. Again, a good advisor should be able to help you with that. Secondly, and this is a biggie, is your likely or possible inheritance to your children. If you take out a mortgage on your property and that mortgage is increasing over time because of the interest rolling up, that's going to have a big impact probably on the inheritance you leave to your children. Now, I know I said only time before last, I think, when we looked at the calculations, it's not as bad as it could be, but there's no question, if you borrow money off your house and spend that money, that's less money that you're going to be able to leave to your children. So you obviously need to think about that very seriously. It depends on how you feel about inheritance. Maybe your children are richer than you are and they don't need to inherit from you. Depends what you feel about that, and also what they feel. It's always something that I would strongly urge any equity release clients of mine to do, is to speak to their children, speak to the whole family, make it a family decision. If you do that at outset, it certainly saves strife later on, not only for you but also for your advisor. So talk to your children and consider how your equity release proposal might affect your inheritance. And not just inheritance, but as ever, you know, we don't ever, as you know, if you watched any of these videos or a few of them, you'll know that any sort of aspect of your finances should never be kept or looked at in isolation, but rather in the wider picture. So look at how your equity release planning impacts on your wider planning with regards to inheritance or whatever. Thirdly, you need to consider the impact of death or long-term care. Now, obviously, if you're dead, you don't care, you're long gone. But when you've got an equity release mortgage, death, or you moving permanently into residential long-term care has a bearing, because you would then have to sell a property, or what you actually have to do is pay off the mortgage, if indeed it is a mortgage, lifetime mortgage that you have. So you need to be very aware of that. At a time of upheaval anyway, moving into care, It may be that having to sell your house might be a hassle too many, but it's something you would need to think about. It doesn't have to happen immediately, but it would certainly have to happen very soon after you moved into care, that your lifetime mortgage company would want repayment. It may be that you might have to sell your property at what isn't a very good time. Maybe house prices not doing very well, or it might be difficult to sell your property, and it's very hard to sell property at the moment. Speaking to you in 1st of September 2011, it's a tough market out there, so you would have to sell your property, but it might not be very easy to do so. Remember, either you dying or going into long-term care is what's called a condition subsequent. It sort of brings into a close the equity release arrangement, and the lifetime mortgage company would want their money back before too long after that. And fourthly, consider future changes in circumstances. Maybe you're considering equity release now because you need some money now. No other reason really why you would think to do it. Maybe you will not need that money in future. And what happens if your partner dies? You're in a couple, one of you dies, perhaps you then are taking less or smaller holidays, spending less money. Maybe you won't need the income that you're seeking to arrange then. Just have a mind to what that might mean. Might you want to move house in the future? Would taking out an equity release mortgage impact that? Would it stop you from doing that? Just consider all these things in the context of your equity release, and again, a good advisor should help facilitate these conversations and prompt you to think about these things. So 4 things primarily: state benefits and your access to them, what impact equity release might have on any inheritance you leave to your children, what happens on death and long-term care. Could it force you into a house sale at a time that you don't want to do it, or that's not a good time, either you or those that you've left behind? And what about future changes in circumstances, loss of a spouse, or no longer needing the income or capital that you're borrowing? All things to think about. Next time I'm going to look at the actual advice process, how you go about getting advice on equity release. But for now, from Lost With You, very pretty spot and a beautiful day. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.